The wind howling through the Blackwood Valley was not just a weather phenomenon, it was a living, breathing entity that sought to devour any warmth left in the world. It was a relentless, biting force that stripped the heat from your blood and the hope from your very soul. In this isolated, frozen expanse, survival was never guaranteed. It was a daily, grueling negotiation with a ruthless nature. Most sensible families had abandoned these treacherous woods decades ago, fleeing the isolating, suffocating embrace of the endless winter for the loud, warm comforts of civilization. But not Arthur. Arthur was a man carved from the very pine. Trees he felled, shaped by the frost, and deeply rooted in the frozen earth of the mountains. He was a lumberjack, a man of massive stature and quiet resilience, whose skin was a map of the harsh years he had weathered. He lived in a modest, sturdy log cabin built by his own hands, and his days were dictated by the swing of his heavy iron axe and the needs of his only daughter, Lily. Lily was 7 years old, a tiny spark of life and light in a world painted entirely in oppressive shades of white and grey. She was his entire universe, the sole reason his massive heart continued to beat against the crushing weight of the cold. It was the morning after the most violent blizzard they had seen in a decade. The storm had raged with an unforgiving fury for 3 days and 3 nights, burying the valley under a heavy, suffocating blanket of snow. The silence that followed the storm was heavy, almost deafening, ringing in the ears with a profound emptiness. Arthur stepped out of the heavy wooden door of their cabin, his breath instantly pluming in the frigid, razor-sharp air like thick dragon smoke. He wore his heavy, fur-lined coat, his boots crunching deeply into the fresh, waist-high powder. Lily trailed close behind him, bundled so thickly in wool and animal hides that she looked like a small, walking fabric mountain. They needed firewood, and they needed it desperately. The reserves inside had dwindled dangerously low during the storm, and if they didn't replenish the pile soon, the creeping frost would claim them in their sleep. They waded through the pristine, treacherous landscape, the snow clinging to their legs like lead weights. The towering pine trees groaned under the massive accumulation of ice, their branches bowing toward the earth. As Arthur swung his axe into a fallen birch, the rhythmic thud echoing through the hollow valley, Lily wandered a few paces away, her bright blue eyes scanning the unbroken white canvas of the forest floor. The cold was seeping through the soles of her boots, but she was a child of the winter, accustomed to the bite. She walked toward the edge of a frozen creek, where the fog hung thickest, swirling like ghostly apparitions over the ice. Then she saw it. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, a reflection of the pale morning sun catching on a shard of ice. But the light did not shimmer, it pulsed. It was a faint, unnatural, glowing emerald green emanating from beneath. A massive snowdrift tucked beneath the exposed roots of an ancient dead oak tree. Lily paused, holding her breath, her heart giving a strange, uneven thump. She took a step closer, sinking to her knees in the deep powder. The glow was coming from deep within the snow. "Papa!" she called out, her voice a tiny, high-pitched ribbon of sound instantly swallowed by the vastness of the forest. Arthur dropped his axe immediately, the protective instinct of a father propelling his heavy boots through the snow with terrifying speed. When he reached her, Lily was already digging frantically with her thick woolen mittens, her small hands moving like a desperate animal. "Look, Papa, it's glowing. Something is looking at me." Arthur knelt beside her, his sharp, weathered eyes narrowing. Beneath the twisted, frost-covered roots, partially buried in the dense, packed snow, was a solid block of translucent ice. And inside that block of ice, suspended in a frozen tomb, was a creature. It was small, curled into a tight, agonizing ball of silver-grey fur. But its eyes were open. They were not dull and lifeless. They were a piercing, luminescent emerald green, glowing with a faint, otherworldly light that defied the freezing temperatures. It looked like a cat, but its proportions were subtly, strangely wrong. Its ears were tipped with long, elegant tufts of black fur, and its paws were massive, disproportionate to its frozen body. "Is it alive?" Lily whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of awe and profound sadness. Arthur placed his heavy, calloused hand against the smooth surface of the ice. It was colder than death. The creature inside was completely encased, a tragic victim of the flash freeze that had swept through the valley during the peak of the storm. By all logic, by all the laws of nature that Arthur respected and understood, the animal was long gone. The glowing eyes had to be some strange phosphorescence, a trick of the frozen woodland. "It's gone, little bird," Arthur said softly, his voice rough like sandpaper. "The winter claimed it." But Lily shook her head violently, tears instantly, freezing on her pale cheeks. "No, Papa, I felt it. It looked at me. Please, we can't leave it to the ice." Arthur looked from the desperate, pleading face of his daughter to the strange, glowing eyes trapped in the ice. The village lore, passed down through generations of mountain folk, spoke of spirits of the forest, creatures of the wild that should never be brought across the threshold of a human home. But Arthur saw the reflection of his own loneliness in his daughter's eyes. With a heavy sigh that plumed into the freezing mist, he reached down. He gripped the heavy, uneven edges of the ice block. It weighed as much as a boulder. Straining his massive shoulders, his muscles burning beneath his heavy coat, Arthur lifted the frozen tomb from the snowdrift. The walk back to the cabin was an excruciating ordeal. The wind seemed to recognize that they were stealing its prize, fighting Arthur with every agonizing step. The ice block bit into his forearms, numbing his flesh right through his thick sleeves. When he finally pushed open the heavy wooden door of the cabin, the residual, life-saving warmth of the iron stove washed over them. Arthur didn't even take off his snow-covered boots. He carried the heavy block of ice to the center of the room, setting it down inside a large, galvanized metal washtub. He rushed to the stove, throwing in fresh logs of dried birch and stoking the dying embers until a roaring, violent fire chased the creeping shadows from the corners of the room. The thawing process was a terrifyingly slow, delicate dance on the edge of a blade. Arthur warmed fresh water in a heavy iron pot, dipping thick, clean woolen cloths into the steaming liquid. Kneeling beside the metal tub, he draped the hot, wet towels over the block of ice. At first, nothing happened. The ice was stubborn, refusing to yield its prisoner. But Arthur and Lily did not stop. For hours, as the afternoon sun dipped below the tree line and plunged the valley into a terrifying darkness, they worked. They replaced the cooling towels with fresh, steaming ones. Slowly, agonizingly, the ice began to weep. Water dripped down the sides of the block, pooling in the bottom of the tub. The silver-grey fur of the creature began to emerge from its frozen prison, matted and dark with moisture. As the last thick layer of ice melted away, the creature slumped lifelessly into the bottom of the tub. It was a tragic, motionless bundle of wet fur. Arthur reached out, his thick fingers gently pressing against the creature's chest. Nothing. No heartbeat, no rise and fall of the ribs. Lily buried her face in Arthur's shoulder, sobbing quietly. Arthur felt a heavy stone of defeat drop into his stomach. But then, as he pulled his hand away, a violent shudder ripped through the animal's body. It was a chaotic, unnatural spasm. Then came a sound, a wet, rattling gasp for air that sounded incredibly loud in the quiet cabin. The creature's tiny ribs heaved with a sudden, desperate intake of oxygen. "Bring the blankets, Lily! Hurry!" Arthur commanded, his voice sharp with adrenaline. They wrapped the soaking wet creature in layers of thick, dry sheepskin. Arthur rubbed its body vigorously, trying to stimulate the frozen blood flow, massaging the stiff, icy limbs. He warmed a small bowl of goat's milk, dipping a clean cloth into it and squeezing the drops onto the creature's pale, cold tongue. Hours bled into the deep night. Outside, the wind screamed against the window panes, demanding the life it had been promised. Inside, by the flickering, dancing orange light of the fire, a miracle was slowly taking place. Just before dawn, the shivering finally ceased. The creature let out a long, low exhalation that sounded strangely like a sigh, and then it opened. Its eyes. The luminescent emerald green glow was back, burning with a fierce, intelligent intensity that made Arthur's breath hitch in his throat. This was no ordinary house cat. Now that it was thawed and its fur was beginning to dry and fluff out, its true nature was becoming terrifyingly clear. It was massive, easily the size of a medium dog, with muscular, powerful shoulders, thick legs and paws armed with thick, curved claws that looked like polished obsidian. Its coat was a mesmerizing tapestry of silver, white, and dark charcoal spots. It was a ghost lynx, a creature of absolute myth, said to only exist in the deepest, most untouched corners of the high mountains. The creature slowly pushed itself up on its wobbly, recovering legs. It shook its massive head, its long ear tufts twitching. It looked directly at Arthur, its glowing green eyes holding a depth of understanding that was profoundly unsettling. It did not hiss. It did not cower. It simply observed. Then it turned its gaze to Lily, who was sitting perfectly still on the wooden floorboard. The giant cat took a slow, deliberate step toward the little girl. Arthur tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for the heavy iron fire poker resting against the hearth. A wild predator, starving and traumatized, was entirely unpredictable, but the creature simply lowered its massive head and gently pressed its wet nose against Lily's outstretched hand. A deep, resonant purr began to vibrate within the animal's chest, a sound so loud and powerful it seemed to rattle the very floorboards of the cabin. Lily smiled, her face lighting up the dim room. "I'll call you Orion," she whispered, burying her fingers in the thick silver fur behind its ears. From that moment, an unbreakable, unspoken bond was forged. Orion required massive amounts of food, consuming Arthur's precious stores of dried meat with a terrifying appetite, but he recovered with an astonishing, almost supernatural speed. Within a week, Orion was not just surviving, he was thriving. He followed Lily everywhere within the confines of the cabin, a silent silver shadow. He wasn't just a rescued animal, he was a guardian. When Arthur went out to chop wood, Orion would sit by the window, his emerald eyes fixed on the tree line, his ears pivoting like radar dishes at every distant crack of a branch. But the wilderness is a jealous master, and it does not easily forgive those who steal from its icy grasp. 2 weeks after the rescue, the true test of their unnatural family arrived. It was a moonless, suffocatingly dark night. The wind had died down, leaving a heavy, terrifying stillness over the valley. Arthur was awakened by a sound that froze the blood in his veins. It was the low, guttural snarl of a timber wolf. But it wasn't just one. It was a chorus of deep, starving growls echoing from just outside the cabin walls. A desperate pack, driven mad by the harsh winter, had smelled the livestock in Arthur's small adjacent barn, and they had smelled the humans inside the cabin. Arthur leaped from his bed, grabbing his loaded hunting rifle from the wall. He could hear the heavy thuds of the wolves throwing their bodies against the thick wooden door of the barn. Lily awoke, crying out in terror. But before Arthur could even reach the window, Orion moved. The giant silver cat did not cower. He let out a sound Arthur had never heard before, a terrifying, ear-splitting shriek that sounded like tearing metal, a battle cry of pure, ancient wildness. Orion leaped onto the heavy wooden dining table, his emerald eyes blazing like twin fires in the darkness, his body coiled like a steel spring. Arthur threw open the front door, stepping onto the porch with his rifle raised. In the snowy yard, illuminated by the faint starlight, were 5 massive, starving timber wolves. They turned their attention from the barn to Arthur, their yellow eyes fixed on him, their teeth bared in vicious snarls. The largest of the pack, the alpha, lunged forward. but a silver blur shot past Arthur from inside the cabin. Orion hit. The alpha wolf with the force of a freight train, knocking the massive canine into the deep snow. The Ghost Lynx fought with a terrifying, breathtaking ferocity, a whirlwind of silver fur, slashing obsidian claws and glowing emerald eyes. He was vastly outnumbered, but he fought with the supernatural strength of a creature defending its own blood. The wolves, expecting easy prey, were completely overwhelmed by the sheer, brutal aggression of the giant cat. Within moments, after a flurry of agonizing yelps and tearing snow, the remaining wolves broke and fled back into the suffocating darkness of the tree line, realizing they had challenged something far more dangerous than a man with a gun. The silence returned to the valley, heavy and complete. Orion stood in the center of the blood-stained snow, his chest heaving, his silver coat ruffled but unbroken. He turned slowly, looking up at Arthur on the porch. The wild, murderous fury slowly melted from his glowing green eyes, replaced by that calm, profound intelligence. Orion walked slowly back up the wooden steps, past Arthur, and went straight to Lily, who was standing trembling in the doorway. He rubbed his massive head against her legs, his deep, rumbling purr starting up. Once again, a comforting vibration in the cold night air. Arthur lowered his rifle, a profound sense of awe washing over his trembling body. They had saved the creature from the ice, but in return, the ice had given them a protector. Orion was not a pet, and he would never be truly tame. He was a wild spirit, a warrior of the frost. But as Arthur closed the heavy wooden door against the cold, watching the giant silver cat curl up on the rug in front of the roaring fire with his daughter, he knew one thing for certain. They were no longer just a lumberjack and his daughter, trying to survive the winter. They were a pack, bound by the snow, warmed by the fire, and guarded by the glowing eyes of the deep forest.